In our never-ending quest of finding new ways to shade and add value to our pictures, today we're going to be talking about shading techniques and how to use them. So this video is going to work a little different than usual. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show exactly what these shading techniques are. Then we're going to take a look at some artists' examples, and then we're going to have some practical practice. So first let's look at hatching. So real quick, the reason I drew a line in the middle is because I'm going to show you two different ways that you can do hatching. This first way, we're going from top to bottom of whatever we are shading in here. Now, hatching is just essentially parallel lines next to each other that never cross over. So to get lighter to darker, you're just going to space it out for lighter and make them more clumped together for darker. Now, if we're looking at another way, this also goes to cross hatching as well. What you can do is you can kind of just have the line broken up. You want to make sure that they're all going the same direction. Now, hatching can go in any direction. It can go straight up and down, diagonal like I'm doing. However you do it, you just want to make sure that it's all going in the same direction. All right, so let's not even pretend. Cross hatching is pretty self-explanatory at this point. All you're going to do is the same method as hatching with the parallel lines, and then like I'm doing here, you're going to cut through them going the complete opposite direction or perpendicular lines. Now, to make these darker, again, you can just clump them together closer, or what you can do is you can bring them together with more lines. So again, if you have maybe like plus signs, right, straight up and down, left to right, then you can come in with diagonal, left to right diagonal, and then right to left diagonal to create that darker value. Again, it can go either way. So another method is the slow and painstaking method of stippling. Now, if you can't tell, it's not my favorite technique, but I do want to say I've seen some really, really beautiful work with it. It is something that you generally, after doing something in a stippling format, you feel really rewarded because, well, it took forever. Now, so it's simply just the method of applying dots to your paper. Again, you can do this with whatever kind of material you'll have. Generally, it's going to be a dry material or a wet material like ink or graphite. But simply put, to make it darker, you just put more dots closer together. To make it lighter, less dots next to each other. Now, if you have a digital format like I do, you can always manipulate this by trying out different splatter brushes like you see me doing here and kind of cheat the system. And I really like that. I like cheating. This is good. Now, if you've never heard of stippling, you might have heard of the term pointillism or dottillism, which is not a real art term technically, but people use it, so it's real enough, right? So here we have another form of stippling, which is just going to be creating a bunch of circles. Again, you can create any shape, and it will be a shading technique. And again, the smaller, more condensed, the darker, and the bigger, the more spaced out, the lighter of a value you're going to have. A really fun shading technique is the scribbles one. So I have a good example of this later that you guys will see on how you can use it. But again, it's really just a matter of filling up the space for darker and leaving the space more open for lighter. And really, it gets to just be kind of as free as you want. It is good sometimes to have some restrictions or bounds, like I use the lasso tool in Photoshop to keep me within my lines. So probably one of the most well-known forms of adding shading and value to a picture is going to be the blending format. Now, if you guys have done this traditionally, it's generally going to be, you put down some graphite or charcoal and you smeared it with something, your finger, a tissue, a blending stump if you had it. And again, the cool thing about this is you can kind of add and layer values and you can build them up and then knock them down and kind of get to that level that you want to. So this is going to be a technique for basically just charcoal and graphite here. You're going to need some sort of dry tool like that and an eraser. And just like the name suggests, it's about removing. So, I think this one's pretty self-explanatory on how you get light to dark, right? Really quick, before we get any further with this lesson, I just want to say that this means absolutely nothing without understanding value scale. Okay, so you either love it or you hate it. I am not sure which one you are a part of, but we have to understand that values are really going to be a part of everything. So if we're going to understand values and different shading techniques, and we're going to utilize this, whether it's cross-hatching, hatching, blending, scribbles, whatever, you name it, wood texture, go for a crazy one. When you're going to light a picture and you want to light it realistically, or even just semi-realistically or believably, you have to understand value scale. Now that I've done my teacher duty, let's move to the fun stuff. So a quick search through Pinterest and I found a couple artist examples of some of the stuff we looked at. So here we have an example of hatching. Now this is a simple pen and ink method. We'll get into the materials in a second that you use for this type of technique, but just kind of observing this, you can see that there is really no kind of cross hatching too much going on. I see a little bit here, but otherwise everywhere we're looking, we're really just seeing some nice hatching marks going down. And this really gets a nice sense of our value from light to dark. Now, is this a perfect picture? I don't know. That's for you to judge. But again, I'm going to kind of say this now. I might repeat this a few times. To me, these shading techniques are best used in practice, not in a realistic hyper-rendered picture. But that's going to be me personally. Let's keep moving. So here we have a couple really nice examples of cross-hatching. Now, these are super well rendered. You can see the light to the dark. This person has a very, very, very good understanding of their value scale. And I say this person, but I should say these two people. And you really get a good idea of the shape of the form that they're showing you. And that, at the end of the day, no matter what technique you use, is going to be the purpose of using shading in general, right? So we're trying to find plane changes in form and light. So only for those with a massive patience can handle this method, but here we have some stippling techniques, and I think stippling is really beautiful for something where you kind of want to zone in on something, really, zoom in, have it be just about that object. These are both just kind of like a rose or a foot in a ballet slipper, but it's not a whole scene, right? I think that's where stippling, in my opinion, works best because it kind of shows off the work ethic, and then it also really shows off, just in general, the illustration that you were trying to show. Next, we have one of my favorite techniques, which is the scribble technique. Now, the reason I love this, if you guys have seen any of my past videos, you know I'm all about how do you add motion and energy to your illustrations, right? Whether it's cartoony or real. And just look at this picture. It's someone sitting, they have their head buried in their hand, whatever the emotions that are happening in this picture, but it's so lively that the lines are just moving all over. Now, some people might not be able to handle this. This might be a little chaotic. That's completely understandable. But it's something that if you know how to utilize, you can really make it work to what you're trying to tell your audience. All right, blending. We all know blending. If you guys have ever worked with charcoal or had any sort of traditional classes, blending is where your fundamental skills come in. That being said, blending is one of the most essential things that you can probably understand how to do. So working with a material like charcoal, graphite, whatever you can, and smoothing those textures and learning how textures gradient and learning where they really have hard shifts in light as well, where it goes from highlight to dark, is always going to do you good, especially when you want to start manipulating these other techniques. So this wasn't a technique I showed, but I do want to show this as an idea that what I showed is not the only limitation, right? There's so many ways that you can do shading techniques. You can do it like this. I call it a controlled swirl. It kind of has the feeling of like a wood grain texture. I've seen people use wood grain texture in their pictures. I've done it before too. So again, whatever kind of shape or element or line structure, you can think of, you can hold yourself to that. You can make a whole picture up of bigger or tinier triangles if that's your thing, and you're going to get the same effect as doing something like this, as long as you understand, again, going from light to dark on your value scales. All right, and lastly, we have removal. Now, I couldn't find an example of this, and I think I couldn't because I didn't really know what to technically call it. It's not going to be called removal technique, but this is something that we've done before. If you guys want to check it out, you can see some of my life drawing exercise videos where we did a removal life drawing where you tone your paper and you just erase out what you're trying to see. So it works just like that. Again, this kind of forces you to work in a different way because instead of putting down darks, you're putting down lights. And it's really good to challenge your brain sometimes in that way. It helps you kind of see your picture a little differently. Now, if we're being real with each other, the real place that you see these techniques used on a professional level are comic books. And comic books and comic book artists are the masters of manipulating these techniques, mainly hatching and cross-hatching. And there's so many other ink techniques that are out there that, we could go over that in a whole video or maybe even several videos of different comic book inking techniques. But again, if you want to learn these things and you want to kind of master these, I would say go to your local comic book store, download a comic on an app, whatever you got to do. Mangas are great too, and check that out. Those are going to be your sources of if you really want to learn how to master these techniques. All right, so when I was learning these techniques in school, which is where this is from, this is one of my old school pieces here. You can see I wanted to show this just because you can use so many different varieties in your piece. See, if we just kind of like zoom in on a couple of these, what I did was I took the idea of, fur or something like that. I just added a couple lines to it. And that was my whole value, right? This was my shading technique. And then where it got closer together, I just filled it in more, and it gave this feeling of light going to dark. Now, not to dissect all of these, but I just want to show, you can do it with zigzags. Here I just did kind of like a squiggly line. Piglet here has hatching and cross hatching. What I like here is this is cross hatching or hatching patterns. It's kind of like quilting, where I would kind of come in and maybe count like 4 to 5, and then I would come in with a different line, and then you'd come in, and you just kind of have to take your time and be patient with it. But to me, I really like the way that this kind of looked, and it gave a neat effect to the overall picture. And so I said that I didn't think this could be used necessarily for full illustrations. Well, that's just my opinion, and I want to express it in this, which is an assignment that I had to do when I was in school. I had to take those textures I created and put them into an illustration. Totally viable. It looks cool. It's super tedious and takes forever. But that being said, I think you can get a really great picture from it if that's your goal. And I'm not trying to steer anyone away from that, but just me personally, I think there's so many tools out there that kind of do this stuff for you. And I would say your time is better used learning to manipulate those in the end. But that being said, I am someone that went through traditional schooling, and I do have a big heart for practicing the traditional first. A question you might be having right now is, what material should you be using? Well, really, you can use anything that makes a straight line, but the ones that I suggest generally are your graphite pencil, charcoal, or of course, pen and ink. And this could be with, the pen, or it could be with a brush if you feel like you have that control. So go ahead and grab your root beers, because we're going to go ahead and get started on practicing some of these techniques. So you're going to need 4 cubes for this. Now, you don't have to use perspective if you don't want to, but it would make me feel all warm and fuzzy inside if you did. That might be something. Next, we're going to need some sort of light source. Now, you don't have to draw it in like I'm doing, but again, we just want to remember that there is no shadow without light, so it helps me to kind of understand where it's coming from. It might help you too. Okay, so once you have your cube and your light source ready to go wherever you put it, we're going to start adding values. Now, I'm going to keep it simple. The top is going to be the lightest light. The side that I'm working on right now, it's going to be kind of like a halftone, mid-tone, pretty light. It's getting a good amount of light hitting it. And then that side that is away from the light is going to be my darkest, and then I'll throw on a cast shadow. Again, when you're practicing something, make it as simple as possible. I've seen a lot of examples on YouTube of people doing this with spheres, and I think that's great if you're going to practice, maybe take it to the next level. But why throw in the complication of curves and all that stuff? Now, really quick, speaking of spheres, I do want to say, when you're drawing something round and you're using a hatching technique, make sure you contour around the roundness, okay? See the curves? So right now we're working on a cube, so these lines can be completely straight. But again, I do just want to bring that up. It's the same thing if you're working on hatching on maybe a fur texture, you're going to follow the pattern of the fur. You're not going to go in opposite directions of the fur or against the fur, because it's not going to look right. Maybe we can make a video on that too. So I'm going to have these go kind of quick, but again, I don't think you guys really need that much time, and this is something you don't really need to copy me doing. Now, I'll just say one more time, to get your darker values, you're going to be adding more lines together. So the closer together, the darker that value is going to seem. Remember, we need a dark side and a light side. So we're still working with our value scales here. Just because we're learning new techniques doesn't mean we get to throw out the principles that we learned in the beginning. Next, we're moving on to cross hatching. So I just want to say for this one, if you felt like you didn't go darker with the last hatching one, just use that one for the cross hatching. That's completely fine. Because again, cross hatching is literally just adding a opposite direction to your hatching marks. So if you don't want to do it twice, work smarter, not harder. That's fine with me. So here I'm just going to, again, build up my values. I seen in the last picture, I wanted this side to be a little bit darker. And it's fun to play with your values, like push it, get a little more dramatic if you want to, see what you can do. What I'm going to do for the dark side is I'm going to play with that principle that I was talking about, where I kind of experiment with some of the additional directions. So I'm going to have some left to right, up and down, and then I'm going to add in some diagonal effects too. Now, something I do want to add, since we are drawing on a perspective plane, I'm not doing it too well because I'm kind of working pretty quick here, but I do want to follow the general direction of the perspective. So when I'm drawing my lines that are left to right, I'm kind of drawing them as if I'm as if I'm going to the vanishing point. So I'm imagining that in my head as I'm drawing that. It generally helps with keeping the shape and general direction of your image. Oh, and don't forget to write the name above your notes. Alright, so next we have the long and tedious process of stippling. Now this one is going to definitely work better, or at least show up better, if you're using a darker material. I probably would recommend mostly ink for this one. You could use even a ballpoint pen if you want to, if that's all you had on hand. Graphite might not show up too well, and charcoal is just going to get messy. You're going to have to be really careful where you put your hand if you're using charcoal, because you're probably just going to smear this, and then you're going to get a more smoothed out or blended value scale. But anyways, you know, it's a very tedious process, so take your time. It's something that kind of can be sore on the arm if you're not used to it. But again, as you guys can see here, when it comes to this, I'm down with cheating a little bit. So I'm using my digital tools after I finish the front facing two sides there. So I'm going to come in, just kind of add some value to that with my splatter brush. Again, though, you know, the general principle still remains. Just put more dots closer together. You can also use bigger dots closer together in the darker value areas, and you get a pretty cool effect. It just takes a long time. All right, and my personal favorite scribble. So I gotta say, if you are someone that is really stuck on details in your art, such as me, if you guys have ever seen any of my past videos, this is something that will completely force you to let go of that, because you just can't control scribbles. Now, I do recommend, if you're using digital, or maybe have some masking tape or something, to kind of give yourself a border, so that way you don't kind of go out and give your cube some hairy edges. I will say that, you know, doing this on the cube kind of gave it a hairy effect, I would think. But again, it's really cool to just kind of see. I think this is something that looks really nice when you just let yourself loosely kind of go over it. You know, it's like that picture I showed where, I mean, the scribbles were out and about on those edges that the person did for the figure. So it kind of goes with motion. You know, this cube isn't really in motion, but we're just practicing these techniques. And that's pretty much it, guys. So again, you know, there's so many other techniques that you can use. I just wanted to cover a general basis here. But I want to hear from you guys. Which ones did you like the best from this video? Do you feel like one of these you might incorporate into your artwork in the future? Or do you hate all of them? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, I want to say too, if you guys have any suggestions for future videos, let me know, and I want to make those happen for you. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.